Some of the most important music ever made was recorded in a single afternoon by people who had never met before in a room with no soundproofing for almost no money. And you know every word of it. Music does not move in straight lines. It gets stolen, banned, accidentally invented, and then sold back to the people it came from. Every decade did this. Here is how. The 1950s did not invent rock and roll. Black musicians in America had been playing rhythm and blues for decades before the word rock and roll existed. What the 1950s did was hand it to a white audience through a white face, and the industry called that a breakthrough. Elvis Presley did not write Johnny B. Good. He did not write Hound Dog. He did not write most of the songs that made him famous. The songwriters behind those records were largely uncredited, underpaid, and in several cases never mentioned in interviews he gave about his own career. The first rock and roll record is still debated. Rocket 88 by Jackie Brenston, recorded in 1951, has a strong claim. The distorted guitar on that track was an accident. The amplifier had been damaged in transit, they recorded it anyway. That damaged sound became the template for an entire genre. By the end of the decade, the music industry had figured out that teenagers were a market. That realization changed everything that came after. The 1960s are remembered as a decade of musical freedom that is partially true and mostly constructed. The British invasion, led by the Beatles in 1964, was not a spontaneous cultural moment. It was a calculated marketing campaign by their manager Brian Epstein, who spent months pitching them to American labels that repeatedly said no. Ed Sullivan said yes because he needed content for a February slot. That slot changed American music permanently. The Beatles themselves were obsessed with American rhythm and blues. They covered Chuck Berry, they covered Little Richard, the music that America exported as something to move past, Britain absorbed, refined, and sold back to America at a profit. Nobody planned that day. Psychedelic music in the late 1960s was not entirely the product of artistic exploration. A significant portion of it was funded intentionally or not by the CIA. The agency ran experiments with LSD on unwitting subjects throughout the decade. Some of those subjects were artists. The music they made afterward does not sound like what they made before. That is not a metaphor. That is documented history. The 1970s split music into more genres simultaneously than any decade before or since. Disco, punk, heavy metal, funk, reggae, and the early architecture of hip hop all existed at the same time, in the same cities, often in the same neighborhoods. Disco is remembered as shallow. It was not. Disco emerged from Black and Latino gay communities in New York and became the most commercially dominant music in the world by 1978. When it collapsed suddenly and violently. Disco Demolition Night in 1979, where a radio DJ organized a stadium event to blow up disco records, drew 50,000 people and a riot. The anti-disco movement was not just about music taste. Punk happened at exactly the same time for the opposite reason. Where disco spent money on production, punk spent nothing. The entire philosophy was that technical skill was irrelevant. Some of the most influential punk bands of that era could not tune their instruments. That was the point. Hip hop was invented in the Bronx in 1973 at a birthday party. DJ Kool Herc isolated the percussion break in a record by extending it using two copies of the same vinyl. That technique, called the breakbeat, is the structural foundation of nearly every genre that followed. It happened at a party his sister organized. She charged 25 cents admission. The 1980s made music visual in a way it had never been before. MTV launched in 1981 and for the first 2 years played almost exclusively white artists. Michael Jackson's label had to threaten to pull all their artists from the network before Billie Jean got airtime. Once it did, MTV's ratings doubled. The synthesizer did to the 1980s what the electric guitar did to the 1950s. It made sounds that had never existed before, and the musicians using it were largely self-taught because there was no curriculum. They were figuring it out in real time. Most of the iconic sounds of that decade were discovered by accident while trying to do something else. Hair metal and hip hop existed in parallel and ignored each other almost completely. By the end of the decade, hip hop had outsold hair metal without a single major label fully understanding how it happened. The cassette tape made music portable for the first time. You could record anything, you could share anything. The industry called it piracy. The culture called it a mixtape. The mixtape built careers that the industry would later claim it discovered. Nirvana did not kill hair metal. Hair metal had already been declining for 2 years before Nevermind came out in 1991. What Nirvana did was give the industry a new category to sell. They called it alternative to what was never clearly defined. The 1990s were the last decade where a physical product determined how music was sold. The CD was the most profitable format in music history. Labels charged more for it than vinyl, even though it cost less to produce. Um, Consumers did not know this. By 1999, a 16-year-old in Boston had released software that made all of it irrelevant. Napster took 18 months to get 80 million users. The label spent the next decade suing teenagers. Hip hop became the dominant commercial genre in America during the 1990s. It had taken less than 20 years to go from a birthday party in the Bronx to the best selling music format in the world. iTunes launched in 2003 and sold songs for 99 cents. The labels agreed to this because they thought it would stop piracy. It did not stop piracy. What it did was train an entire generation to believe a song was worth 99 cents. That belief destroyed the album as a commercial format within a decade. Autotune was invented in 1997 by an oil industry engineer named Andy Hildebrand. It was designed to process seismic data. Someone suggested it could correct a singer's pitch. The first major pop record to use it was Cher's Believe in 1998. The producers lied about how it was made for 2 years. By the 2000s, the sound they hid had become the defining vocal texture of popular music. MySpace allowed artists to upload music directly to listeners for the first time. Arctic Monkeys, Lily Allen, and Soulja Boy all built audiences there before any label signed them. The industry watched this happen and still did not understand what it meant. Streaming replaced ownership. Spotify launched in the US in 2011, and artist earns roughly one third of 1 cent per stream. To earn minimum wage from Spotify alone, a musician needs approximately 1.5 million streams per month. Most artists with record deals do not reach that number. SoundCloud created an entire generation of artists who recorded in bedrooms, released music with no label, no manager, and no budget, and built audiences in the millions. SoundCloud rap became a genre. The artists who defined it were teenagers making music on free software at 2 a.m. Several of them are now among the most streamed artists in history. Taylor Swift re recorded her first 6 albums after her original masters were sold without her consent. It is the largest artist led reclamation of catalog in music industry history. The industry did not think it would work. The re recordings outsold the originals. TikTok changed how songs become hits. A track can go from unknown to 100 million streams in a week if a sound clip goes viral. Labels now scout TikTok before signing artists. Some artists have uploaded songs specifically engineered to be used in 15-second clips. The song does not need to be good in full, it needs one moment. During the COVID-19 pandemic, live music stopped entirely for over a year. Artists lost touring income, which for most working musicians is the only income that matters. The wealthiest artists were fine, everyone else was not. Artificial intelligence generated music that passed blind listening tests in 2023. An AI generated track using Drake's vocal style reached millions of streams before being taken down. The legal framework for what that means does not exist yet. Every decade told the same story in different clothes. Someone made something new, someone else figured out how to sell it. The person who made it rarely got what they were owed. The next generation found it anyway, took it apart, and built something the previous generation did not recognize as music. That pattern has not changed once in 70 years. The song playing in your head right now is the latest version of something that started in a damaged amplifier in 1951 at a birthday party in the Bronx, in a studio where nobody got paid enough, recorded in a single afternoon by people who had never met before. You already knew the song, you just didn't know where it came from.